A large majority of members have approved a UN resolution calling for an immediate halt to Russian aggression in Ukraine and the withdrawal of its forces.
Russian President Putin says he will reinforce the country's nuclear weapons programme, while Spain's Prime Minister Sanchez meets Ukraine's Zelensky in Kiev.
The partner of jailed Eva Kaili, the former Vice President of the European Parliament, has been released but must wear an electronic tag.
These initiatives.
The United Nations General Assembly has approved a non-binding resolution that calls for Russia to end hostilities in Ukraine and demands the withdrawal of its forces. 141 nations voted in favour of the motion, while 7 were against and 32 abstained. The move sends a strong message on the eve of the first anniversary of the invasion that Moscow's aggression must end. Foreign ministers and diplomats from more than 75 countries addressed the Assembly during 2 days of debate, with many urging support for the resolution that upholds Ukraine's territorial integrity.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has vowed to continue equipping Russia's army with advanced weaponry, including nuclear arms. In a televised address on Russia's Defender of the Fatherland Day, he said a modern and effective military measures security and sovereignty.
В этом году на боевое дежурство заступают первые пусковые установки ракетного комплекса «Сармат» с новой тяжелой ракетой. Продолжим серийное производство гиперзвуковых комплексов воздушного базирования «Кинжал» и начнем массовые поставки гиперзвуковых ракет морского базирования «Циркон».
Meanwhile, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has confirmed his continued support to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kiev. His visit comes a day after Spain's Defence Minister confirmed Madrid would send 6 of its German-made Leopard tanks to help defending troops.
Vamos a enviar 6 Leopard 2 A4. Nuestra intención es durante las próximas semanas y meses ver si podemos escalar a un total de 10, es decir, pasar de 6 a 10 y evidentemente también ayudar a los soldados ucranianos a formarse en el uso y en el manejo de estos tanques Leopard.
Moving to Bangalore, India, finance ministers from the group of 7 gathered for a G20 summit have announced they will increase economic aid to Ukraine to the sum of €37 billion. From a winter war to a spring offensive. After a year of fighting, the conflict in Ukraine is entering a potentially decisive phase. In recent months, the combat along the front line has been intense but incremental. But analysts say both sides are now gearing up for a wider push.
Part of the rationale behind the next Russian offensive is probably to disrupt Ukraine's ability to regenerate the capacity to go back on the counteroffensive. So a lot will depend on how many of its reserves Ukraine has to throw in and how badly their casualty rates go up in stopping that Russian offensive.
To a large extent, it's a race against time and for more resources. Will Ukraine receive Western military hardware as promised? Will Russia successfully mobilise fresh troops, replenish stocks and replace lost tanks?
The bad outcome, as it were, is that Ukraine runs out of steam and is unable to take back most of the remaining occupied territory before that new wave of Russian-trained mobilisees and industrial equipment starts to come in at the end of the year. And at that point, we're headed towards, I think, a long-term stalemate.
One factor making that stalemate more likely is the apparent determination of President Putin to push ahead with the war he started. A former US National Security Advisor says Russia's heavy losses have not deterred him.
Putin's made it very clear that he's prepared to sacrifice whatever it takes, and that's, part of the problem. I mean, there's lots of statements being made and rumours coming out that he's willing to sacrifice the 300,000 people who have been called up.
Could that alleged cold indifference lead us to the most catastrophic scenario, the use of nuclear weapons? Putin has hinted at battlefield nuclear strikes in the context of uncontrolled escalation. Is this just sabre-rattling?
Actually using them generates almost no practical benefit at all, and certainly nothing to compensate for all of the costs, both in terms of immediate escalation risk, irradiating things they want to hold on to and be part of, and also pushing away the rest of the world.
If nuclear warfare seems a remote prospect, so too appears the chance for peace or even a ceasefire. Russia and Ukraine have rejected each other's terms for a settlement and for now are focused on territorial gains rather than diplomatic solutions.
Ukraine boycotted the latest meeting of the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe over the presence of Russian lawmakers that they described as an affront. The event was held in Vienna. Austria granted them visas, even though they're under European Union sanctions, and despite protests from 20 countries, including Britain, France and Canada. Some delegates left the room when the floor was given to a Russian parliamentarian. Others voiced their anger.
It's a disgrace that this delegation is here, particularly the delegation that consists of members who are sanctioned individuals who voted to annex independent countries' territories, Donbass, Kherson, Zaporizhia Oblast, Lugansk. Those are the principles this institution was vouched to protect and guard.
Russian MPs were not invited to previous OSCE meetings in the United Kingdom and Poland, but Austria, as the host country of the organisation, claims to be bound by an international agreement.
It is of course difficult to sit with Russian parliamentarians who have blindly supported the Kremlin's war, but it is important that the Russian MPs hear our message. I will be sure to let them know that we reject the war and that OSCE Parliamentary Assembly supports Ukraine.
Demonstrators also gathered in front of the venue to denounce the presence of Russian deputies and the war crimes of Vladimir Putin. Francesco Georgiev, the partner of European Commission former Vice President Eva Kaili, has been freed from jail but will wear an electronic bracelet. The announcement was made on Thursday by the Belgian Federal Prosecutor's Office. Eva Kaili remains behind bars. Both are implicated in a corruption scandal in the European Parliament involving Qatar and Morocco. The two countries are suspected of having tried to influence decisions of the institution. Investigators found €150,000 at the Brussels home of Eva Kaili. MEPs Mark Tarabella and Pier Antonio Panzeri are also in custody.
The European Commission has banned its staff from using the Chinese-owned social media app TikTok over cybersecurity concerns, an issue that was discussed when the CEO of the video-sharing platform met EU commissioners in January. There are fears Chinese tech firms are helping Beijing collect sensitive data.
The European Commission has, as you know, and this was the beginning of the mandate, a very strong focus on cyber security, protecting our colleagues. And of course everyone which is working here in the Commission. And this is of course in this regard that we take some decision sometime and that a decision has been taken.
But TikTok says the Commission's decision is misguided. But is it the first institution to make such a move? The US federal government introduced a similar TikTok ban last year for devices used by its employees.
Who will pay for the development of future internet connectivity in Europe, like 5G and fibre networks? Until now, it's been the big telecom companies like Telefonica and Orange. But now the European Commission is opening up the debate to see if tech companies like Netflix, Amazon and Google should all help foot the bill. The commissioner in charge, Thierry Breton, a former French telecom CEO, says that the costs are becoming too high for telecoms companies alone to pay.
Cette réflexion, je tiens à le dire tout de suite, elle se fait pas contre je ne sais qui en particulier, mais elle se fait bien pour nos concitoyens, pour leur apporter la connectivité, pour leur apporter l'innovation, pour leur apporter l'infrastructure et pour nos entreprises, pour leur apporter le meilleur de la connectivité.
Telecom companies have argued for years that big tech have used their services without contributing, something the sector argues cannot go on.
We think that this is no longer sustainable. Your internet bill, your phone bill cannot be the only way in which we fund 5G and fiber. There is another group of companies that makes a lot of money in the internet with personal data, with advertising. And so it is only natural, in our view, that they also contribute to that.
The Computer and Communications Industry Association, which represents the tech companies' interests, argues that the Commission should find a more inclusive approach and asks that it abandon the idea of burden sharing. On Thursday, the Commission also announced plans to make gigabit connectivity, which is a guarantee of 1 gigabyte per second internet speeds, available to all citizens and businesses by 2030.
Please welcome our guest of honor.
A Lifetime Achievement Award for a Hollywood great. Academy Award-winning filmmaker Steven Spielberg received a standing ovation on Tuesday when presented with an honorary Golden Bear at the 73rd Berlinale Film Festival. The 76-year-old mastermind behind cinematic classics, including the Oscar-winning exploration of the Holocaust Schindler's List, highlighted the significance of receiving the award in Berlin.
This honor has particular meaning for me because I'm a Jewish director. And I like to believe that this is a small moment in a much larger, ongoing effort of healing the broken places of history, what Jews call tikkun olam, the repairing and restoring of the world.
Thank you so much, everybody. Ever.
Movies are dreams.
Spielberg is also hoping to clean up at the Oscars in just a few weeks. His semi-autobiographical film, The Fabelmans, has been nominated 5 times, including Best Screenplay and Best Picture. Starring Paul Dano and Michelle Williams, Spielberg says it was the most emotional project he has ever worked on.